Okay, thank you all for having me. It's very nice to be speaking with you. So yeah, I represent Kinda Brave, and I'll be talking a bit about what publishers generally look for, what we look for specifically from our perspective, what you can do about your game or your business proposal to become more attractive to publishers. So of course, this will have a very quite harsh commercial perspective, and that's the point, because we see all these creative games, and there are a lot of fantastic games here and all out in the world. But at the end of the day, publishers will need to make a commercially informed decision. And so I can just, without targeting anyone specifically, I can tell you everything that we are looking for, so I don't have to offend you in a one-on-one meeting. I'll do that as well if you want me to, but this will be more efficient. I'll talk about some of the reasons for rejection that could be typically seen with a game, and then I'll talk about areas of improvement, and that'll be specifically targeting aspects of a game pitch that you can improve and things that you can't affect. So sometimes people try to bend over backwards to appease to publishers. That's not always the answer, both because publishers aren't always right, me included, unfortunately, but also because there are just general factors that aren't part of the whole ecosystem of, or the process of publishing a game. Bless you. So, as mentioned, we're the first sustainability-focused publisher. That means that everything we do is sort of based in a number of value pillars that we have: people, players, and planet. I had a little trailer, but I'm going to skip that for now. But people, players, and planet are the keywords in how we work with publishing, and that's from all aspects of running the organization internally to how we work with partners externally, and how we deal with the games that are produced within our group. We're based in Uppsala. That's where we have our office. We just had an inauguration 2 days ago, so I came like straight from the office party here to Visby. It's a really nice place, and we have all our studios there. What we want to provide is a safe and sustainable ecosystem for game development. We want to step away from some of the more volatile aspects of typical traditional publishing, and the way that we've chosen to approach this is by mainly working with acquisitions. We mainly acquire full studios or found them from scratch together with the developers that we want to work with, and make sure that they have this internal support system and the centralized resources, that is centralized funding, centralized publishing. So Canterbury Publishing is not just the head of the head or the mother company within the group itself. It's the platform that everything rests on. It's the way that all studios are wound together, even though they're running their own studios as individual companies. And today we have 3 studios, and they are all based in Uppsala, but we're not limited to Uppsala as a city. Of course, that would be a pretty fast depleting market, but we aim to be global, but we need to work in our home turf first. So we're expanding. We hope to announce a 4th studio sometime this summer. And at our core, we are a full-stack publisher. We take care of everything. QA, UX, marketing, branding, community management, social media, localization, all of these things. And anything we don't do in-house, we have a partner for. So you'll be well taken care of with a tailored approach for every specific game. And I touched on this. The model, we call it hybrid indie. It's combining the aspects of indie development that tie to creativity, self-governance, freedom of interpreting your own vision, but enforcing that with the strengths and stability of a larger corporation. So the funding that we can achieve through this group, the legal support, the business support, the HR, you can't expect a team of 3 or 4 or 5 or even 10 or 20 developers to have their own HR department, legal department, financial department. It needs to happen. It happens internally or it's outsourced. Here we can motivate that because we're consolidating all of these things under one roof. So everyone has an HR manager, and everyone has a financial officer, even if they're just a solo developer working under the roof. So that's the idea. Remove and consolidate overhead, foster knowledge, spread risk. I'll be talking about publishing, though. So pretty much enough about us. But when I work as a scout, these are sort of like the steps that I'm always looking at. And I think of it sort of as a funnel. First, there's like discovery. It's all the rain coming down. And discovery Could be in any different source. It could be someone literally just walking up to me at an event saying, hey, here's a game I made, want to have a look at it. Or it could be me doom scrolling on Twitter, seeing, oh, that looks like a cool indie game. I'll send them a DM. I slide into a lot of DMs these days. But in any way, this leads eventually to some sort of contact. This leads to a series of meetings. It's a very simplified process, and the order is always jumbled. But there will be some level of evaluation, a mutual due diligence. That is, we look at their studio, we look at their company, we look at the team, we look at the financials and everything, and we let them do the same to us. You look at our financials, you look at our project plan, you look at the way that we work and meet our managers, you meet the other studios, and eventually, if we land in like, yeah, things are right, the analysis shows that this could be a good business case, the funding is there, the timing is there, we're all aligned, then we start negotiating for an acquisition, and then you become part of the group. It takes typically a minimum of 6 months and involves a bunch of lawyers, but it's a very thorough process, so we know that when we're done with the whole thing and we're coming out the other end, everyone will be very happy and be able to work for a long time. Any decision we make as a company, especially when it turns into acquisitions or judging games, we always have to make a judgment fundamentally based in what I call a risk mitigation perspective. So rather than seeing opportunities, I see risks. And I like to think of it as like someone says, hey, can I pitch you a game? The first thing I see is a perfect marble block. It's 100% marble, and it's 100% risk. Bear with me. Marble is risk. And the more they explain about the game, the more they say, okay, well, it's going to be a roguelike game. And I think, okay, well, roguelikes tend to do fairly well on the indie market, especially with smaller teams can achieve a lot with a roguelike perspective. That's me mentally chipping away at this marble block and slowly forming something else. We're removing risk. And then they say it's going to be a hand-drawn, stylized art, and say, okay, well, maybe there's a large influx of hand-drawn games right now. Now they're suddenly gluing back pieces of marble and adding risk. And then once they've evaluated the entire game and every aspect of it, every single team, everyone, we've done the full due diligence, we have a visualized marble statue, and we can evaluate, like, is this the level of risk we're willing to accept for the cost and for the hope of return on investment? And that's when we can make the final decisions. What I do is a lot of detective work, and it's asking a lot of very inquisitive questions to game developers. But yeah, if we sign a deal, it means that we have accepted a certain level of risk. And if the risk is too high, then we might say no. So I'm going to keep talking about factors of games and factors of studios that add or remove risk. But I want you to have the perspective of risk mitigation in your mind, because that's how we think of it. Yeah, again, this is very like high level. It's quite anecdotal. It does not reflect like the approach of every business model of every publisher out there. It's quite subjective to me. I want you to take it all with a grain of salt, because to some extent I am just some dude saying some shit. And that's my disclaimer. I'm gonna keep spewing it though. So some things that I believe that most publishers can agree on are positive factors. A game that is unique or novel in some way, it naturally stands out. It could be the fact that it just does something very well that's seen in other games, or even better, it competes on different grounds. It does something so different that no other game can really compete with that in a natural way, because it's so unique. We would call that like a blue ocean approach, as opposed to moving away from a very saturated red ocean where everyone else is fighting. Everyone's doing the battle royales right now, 5 years ago maybe. We're over here doing something completely different, and that's interesting. It's especially good if the aspects of communication can lean into those USPs. Maybe it's, you might have seen a game recently where every sprite is embroidered. So they embroider every frame of the characters. So it's really cool, it's very unique. Personally, I don't think it looks very special, but the fact that everything is handmade in some sense makes it very cool. So that sticks out, and no one else is doing that. And we can use that in communication. We can talk about it in our tweets, we can make blogs about it. It's very nicely communicatable uniqueness. Every publisher, of course, has a portfolio. If you go to their website, you're going to see the studios they're working with and the games that they've made or are working on right now. If your game kind of matches the kind of game that they're working with, that they have a set style, that of course is a benefit to you. This will sort of like help the publisher lean into the intricate knowledge of their experience of working with these games, so you know they're experts within their fields. Every publisher has some sort of production going on. If you would believe it, it's almost as much work to release a game as it is to actually make the game. A lot of things are happening behind the scenes. I could list them, but I would just be wasting half the talk listing things. So just trust me when I say that there is a production process going on behind the scenes that are related to the release and marketing of the game. That of course puts pressure on our bandwidth. We only have so many producers, so many marketers, so many content creators within the team that can work on something. So sometimes it's a matter of timing. We need to have the bandwidth and the resources to work with the game right now. That's something you won't really be able to control. Traction is really, really good. Traction is any kind of partial or full market validation, something telling you and thus telling us that people want this game, people are interested in this game. It could be that, oh, you put some pictures out on Twitter and thousands of people like it, and you get hundreds of followers every time you tweet content from your game. Okay, well, people like something about this game. Even better, this traction is more valuable the closer it is to the buy button on the store page. So wish lists and follow on Steam could be more valuable than Reddit followers or Twitter followers, but all of these things add up. It shows us that people are interested in some way. And it's good for you too, because that's where you get all your feedback. And finally then, the game matches some sort of trend analysis, usually some kind of market analysis that we have done ourselves, so that we believe, this is always hypotheses, we believe that there's a market for something, or we believe that there's a trend ongoing, so we want to lean into that as well. That'll help us see to make sure that the timing is right for the near future when you want to release the game. And then you ask yourself, what trends are we even talking about, and who really asked me? Trends are very complex and very fleeting. They don't always refer to a specific genre or a specific mechanic or even a visual style. It's kind of all of those things and none of those things at the same time. You just kind of have to remember that trends are by definition locked in time. So what is true today might not be true at all tomorrow. And that's the beauty and horror of working with games, is that some things just happen overnight. No one predicted MOBA as a genre. No one predicted Battle Royales would get the traction that it did. And no one has any idea what's going to happen tomorrow. But we can guess. And we can make very poorly qualified guesses. And that's what I get paid to do. A lot of us do. And who asked me? No one else asked me. These things that I'm going to talk about next are my own interpretations, and how I interpret them is very subjective. So again, grain of salt, I could be wrong, but so could anyone else. If you asked me, I would say something along the lines of this. Some high impact markets that I'm seeing right now, there's always sort of have been room for strong graphics, a strong visual aesthetic in a game. Just what that actually means is very different from time to time, but I think that's mostly true. In general, people love playing beautiful games. And that's also, it has a double value. It adds value to the game. It also adds value to the hook. It's the first thing you see. It's a piece of art, a hero art, or the first frames of a trailer, or the first screenshot on your store page. If that is captivating and pleasing to look at, it's easier to read further on. I think I'm going to give some examples to some of these. Ori and the Blind Forest, something that's very visually capturing. Banner Saga, some might argue that it's a beautiful game, some don't think so, but it's a unique looking game, and so are a lot of other games. You could also look more to the unique aspects and say that Papers, Please, for its time, had a very strong aesthetic that is easy to recognize. You could see a Papers, Please print screen or a screenshot, and you would recognize it almost instantly. Same with, for instance, Firewatch. Secondly, a very strong game loop is a great pitch. That would be the kind of game that you don't want to put down once you started playing. It's also the ones that are typically categorized as easy to learn, hard to master, and that's good because it means, for me, it means low barrier of entry, long period of value being delivered to the player. A lot of roguelikes in this genre, or this section. I would say that Hades and Vampire Survivors are very powerful game loop contestants. see some nodding, so I know that there are some fans here. And then we have extremely deep gameplay. There's a lot of things to do and explore, typically mechanically in the game, not necessarily, but this is where we would find a lot of management games and maybe some strategy games. But also sometimes like survival games, RPGs, some types of multiplayer or even MMORPG games. My favorite examples would probably be Satisfactory or Factorio for different reasons. Like you get into it quite easily. You punch a rock, you get stone, or you punch a iron ore and you get iron, and then you build things. And at the end of the day, you could be like 20 hours from now be building nuclear power plants, and it's really cool. So you're doing the same. The game loop is quite narrow, but the extent to which it unravels is almost infinite. On the slightly more RPG end, I would say that Dwarf Fortress and RimWorld are much better examples of this. You could go on for literal years and still have new experiences in the gameplay and still be learning things about the game. And lastly, I want to mention like underserved audiences, and that's a tricky one, of course, because it's audiences that haven't been noticed enough for people to make games or rather invest in games for them. It's quite hard to satisfy markets that aren't really known to the mainstream actors and publishers. So they are emergent in the sense that it's not that they emerged. People who play horse games didn't pop up overnight and start playing horse games, and start asking for horse games. They've always been there. It's just that they've been underserved. And the problem being, or the key problem might be that these are typically less verbal subgroups. They aren't the ones that are screaming on Reddit, or they aren't the ones tweeting day in and day out about the next shooter they want. So there's a lack of knowledge, and there's also the regular problem of lack of diversity in the games industry. You'll have people looking like me, making games for other people that look like me, and then people like me investing in them. Maybe a little bit older, just almost. So again, horse games would be a very good example, I think, of this in the last 5 or 10 years. Definitely Star Stable Online being a big hit here, showing that there's a huge market for these types of games. There's a lot of largely young and largely female players that have lacked representation for so long and been dying to play something like this, and the market has just been ignoring them, and the funding hasn't been ignoring them. And now we want to find out, like, who else can we help? Some more specific trends then, or like if you look more towards the execution of the game itself, that I feel have a generally high impact. Again, it's all about like picking battles, and at the end of the day, everything comes down to execution. It should go without saying, but I'll mention them anyway because I think it's an interesting approach or something to think about when you're planning for your next game or looking at revamping whatever you've made so far. High concepts are generally interesting because they are fascinating. It could mean a lot of things as well. It could be just a massive scale of a world. It could be mind-bending physics, twisted worlds, fantastical universes, just you name it. I think Trombone Champion is kind of like a high concept because it's such a unique take. Just like imagine you're playing trombone but bad. That's pretty cool. If you want to go back to like a monumental high concept game, I would say Halo was one of the first big ones. Like imagine a planet built as a ring and there's like civil war and stuff. It's crazy, but more relevant to us than looking at indie games and smaller projects. A lot of first-person puzzlers that came out after Portal, I think, are very inspired by different cool high concepts. Recursion, FPS, where the whole world is recursive, so you can just like keep running inwards towards the level as it grows around you, but you're also fighting other players in that same world, and they're recurring around you. So you're in an infinite world, but also playing like Counter-Strike in there. Superliminal. So one game here that is drawing a lot of inspiration from that mechanically, very cool. Yeah, just move on. So much to exemplify. Minimalistic management, I think, has been growing lately, especially as patience with games is kind of thinning a bit. People have time for some of their like favorite games and some of the big service games, but we're generally drawn towards smaller games, and I don't think it's a matter of like the amount of time we're willing to spend in a game or the amount of money we're willing to spend on a game, because we've never bought so much games collectively as we do now. but I think it's a matter of accessibility actually, and I think it manifests through minimalism. So a game has a low barrier of entry, it's easy to get into and start having fun with if it's just smaller. There are just fewer things to have to consider or have to learn before you can start really enjoying the full extent of the game. That's why I think that like big grand strategy games are always going to have their audience, and as long as they're there, they're going to be safe. But it's hard to get new players into these hardcore strategy games. But if you can insert hardcore grand strategy game here, but make it so much simpler, find the fun, extract that, and put it in a game that's a fifth or a 10th or a 20th of the size and scope, then you got something going. Also great examples here at the conference today. I think Factorio kind of fits here in a sense. It's sort of like a middle thing where it's, again, quite deep, but it's simpler to get into than many other games. Better examples might be Dorf Romantik, which I recommend looking up. It's like almost like a tiled board game, but digital. Very nice, and you're building a beautiful little world, but you don't have to think too much about it. It's not that complex. A Townscaper as well, where there's like almost no game left. You're just kind of doing the plopping, and that's very satisfying. And a lot of people seem to enjoy that, so why not lean into that? I think that's a great aspect of minimalist. Maybe not so much management anymore, but almost. And then I think lo-fi horror is kind of a surprise to a lot of people, but the horror genre has been like solid for as long as any one of us can remember. People love like the thrill and the shock of horror and jump scares and gore and psychological horror. Survival horror got an upswing with Amnesia and the Chinese Room making a lot of their games. It's also a great genre, again, two-pronged approach to get traction through influencers because it's a fun type of content to share. It's fun to share scary moments or to have an audience look at you losing your shit, being attacked by a zombie. It's really nice. And I think what's new here is that lo-fi aspect, the like some sort of retro interpretation of the genre, whether it's getting a VHS style aesthetic, like with filters and shaders, or it's like boiling down the graphics to look more like PlayStation 1 era or similar, or even sometimes like 8-bit art or 1-bit art, monochrome art, really boiling it down to something small. It gives it a very, again, a unique aesthetic, and then combining that with horror has given some very interesting results. I don't think there are any huge mentionable games right now. There are probably a bunch, but I just can't think of any. But rather, there's a lot of smaller games that are doing generally very well relative to the rest of the games of similar scope. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to be talking more about in the near future. And then finally, just quick shout out to Wacky Sandbox Games. I studied in Skövde, so I have to mention Goat Simulator. It's in a contract somewhere. I kind of feel like we've seen sort of like the glory days of these games with I Am Bread and such like silly simulator physics-based games. But I think there's always going to be plenty of room for creative people to make new cool ideas that are largely just meme-worthy. It's funny, like, what if you're a goat? Oh no, what if you're bread? I don't know what they're gonna come up with next. What if you're feelings? But there's always gonna be someone, and then of course there are like lower hanging fruit where you combine a high concept with just adequately funny and controllable physics. And I think I would recommend looking into like the Landfall Games portfolio. They're experts at this. They come up with a high concept, they build it in their own unique, you can always tell that it's a Landfall game. You got the physics, you got the wackiness, and then it's fun. Moving on, reasons for rejection. And like some of the reasoning for why a publisher might say no to a pitch that they're being given. And the two first one are obviously like the big ones that will encapsulate a lot. It's rarely just the one thing, it's usually a combination of things due to various reasons, but if we just keep it very simple, if the publisher doesn't understand the game, or doesn't like playing the game, or doesn't at least trust that the market will enjoy the game. It's fine that if I don't like a game, doesn't mean that that reflects everyone, because I have my own tastes in games. I play my games, but I need to at least be semi-confident that the people who should enjoy this type of game will enjoy this type of game. Visuals, same there. Maybe your game just doesn't look good. Maybe it looks good, but it doesn't look unique. It has the risk of just blending in as a generic title within the very, very saturated market. Remember, we have 30 to 40 games being released every day on Steam alone. It's wild, so you need to stick out in every aspect. Or it could just be that the art itself is very good. The art is very well executed in relation to the resources or the experience of the team, but it just happens to be in a genre that is very art reliant. Like you're trying to pitch a photorealistic game in a world of photorealistic games. Maybe a bad example, but like if you have to consider not only is it good on its own merits, does it still look good when you compare it to the obvious competitors? Does it really look like Tears of the Kingdom when you look at Tears of the Kingdom? It's not a matter of we're almost as good as Zelda. The fact of the matter is we're not as good as Zelda when you could be competing on different grounds. So picking your battles again. Scope ties into a lot of aspects of publisher evaluation. Sometimes the game is just too ambitious for itself. That would be the most normal case. We can't assume that it will live up to its own vision. Like the thing you're pitching sounds great, but we don't trust that it'll be feasible to build in the time frame that you're proposing. Sometimes it could be the other way around. Like you've chosen a genre or an audience that are expecting a certain level of content, as in quantity, or execution, as in quality, that can only be achieved if you have enough development effort put into the game. And so the pitch might just be too small. Like you're pitching the next game within this genre, but it's so small that people are going to ignore it for the benefit of your competitors. Game modes refer to to whether the game is like single player, if it's multiplayer, is it co-op, is it online, is it offline, is it some sort of hybrid, can it be combined? So we need to consider, first of all, is there even an incentive to purchase the game? And one aspect could be if it's a local only or mainly local multiplayer game, then technically only one person out of 2 to 4 customers will need to pay for it. So that's you removing up to 75% of your customers just by letting people share the game. Or maybe you're just doing the hardware developers a big favor by making everyone buy a controller so they can play your game, but they only bought one copy. Not saying that that eliminates like all party games, but you have to consider the financials of that decision. It could also be a matter of whether there's an incentive or not to play with other games, or even the ability. Is it single player only? Well, people might want to play this game socially, or is it single player and multiplayer, but it's not as fun if you play alone? Then you're ostracizing the people that want to play alone, and you're punishing them by not giving the full game experience. And lastly, is there any chance of the game promoting the building of a healthy community? Like, is there enough story that they want to talk about, or lore? Is there enough like strategy in the game, or just customization that they want to share their ideas, share the things that they've created? Like, I built a nice farm in Stardew Valley and I want to share a picture of it online. But if all the farms look basically the same, it's not going to be fun to do that. So you just have to consider, is this game worth discussing outside of the game itself? Because that will help you in the long term. And lastly, I want to teach you a word I call buyability. It is not a word, another disclaimer. But if we, I think about it a lot. If you consider instead the word sellability, which is, spoiler, not a word either, but if you think of something being sellable as something being used to describe the potential for you as a creator to sell your product using things like marketing, campaigns, discounts, influencer marketing, guerrilla tactics, or like anything that has the purpose of increasing awareness of your game for the purpose of selling it. All of these things are really great, really important, generally a good reason for you to partner up with a publisher or some kind of marketing firm to help with these things. Okay, if we switch the perspective to all of those things that you have a control of in the role of a developer, in the creative process. If your game is buyable, we have made it easy for the end user or the player to purchase the game by creating like a valuable proposition. That is, you made a good game. That's the first thing. Like, all in all, you need a good game first, obviously, but there are also the logistics of getting into the game that we need to consider. So anything that adds friction amounts to poor execution. So We could have unreliable or frustrating DRM systems, digital rights management. If anyone remembers, it was called SimCity from 2013 being released, a single-player offline game that required you to be online, and the servers went down when the game released, which means people were sitting on a fully downloaded, fully playable single-player game, and they couldn't start the game because it couldn't get an acknowledgement from a server. And that really did a number on the sales figure. People were very, very frustrated with that because there was no logical reason to have that thing executed. It could also be things like online features being somewhat or very unstable. Could be, as mentioned, the lack of single-player modes or the lack of multiplayer modes if I want to play with other people. Obvious things like bugs. Could be an opaque post-release plan, like the game is out, people are hoping that they will see more content, but they have no idea because you're not communicating your post-release plan at all. Could be that there are people reaching out for help with reporting bugs or asking for support, and no one is helping them or responding to them. Could be trailers, like gameplay trailers or cinematic trailers that don't really explain the game, what it's about or how it's played. Any type of weak onboarding, like bad tutorials or unintuitive controls or poor tooltips, all of these things that remove accessibility for the player. These are all the things that you have control of as developer. These are conscious decisions or unconscious decisions that have been made from the idea to the release of the game. And if your game is hard to purchase, if it's hard to start and hard to enjoy, then it's or even like retention-wise, hard to come back to once you played it once because there are so many things in the game blocking the player from coming back to that original state of having fun, then you are actively pushing your audience away and you're making it harder to enjoy it. So even a good game with good sellability might have bad buyability. So like always try to keep it in mind, is my game buyable? Is it easy? From the point of thinking that this seems like a fun experience, I will go through the hurdles of purchasing and installing and playing it to the point where they're having fun. Is that journey short enough that they will be patient with you without refunding your game? That is a big threat. Next, looking at more like production-related things. Market trends, we mentioned some of them. You could have just tried to pitch me a game that is belonging to a very saturated genre, like where we see a lot of other games being actively released, and we see that the average sales, which are guesstimated but still indicative of how they're performing, they're not doing very well. The game could match, it might not even be in a saturated genre, but it looks like other games within a saturated genre. People eat with their eyes, and they're very judgmental, and they have very short attention spans, so we have to assume the worst. Could be that the revenue model doesn't match the expectations. You pitch something that is typically seen in a free-to-play market, but you're trying to charge money for it, or vice versa. Streamability, is it fun to watch? It has to be fun to watch. Is it only fun to watch? That could also be a problem. Like it's something that I've seen with a lot of horror games, that the game is so scary that it's really fun to watch, but then no one is going to pay for the game because they prefer watching it to actually playing it. Then you don't have the customer left. Or the game is just not open-ended enough. So a game that is fun to watch and fun to play also needs to have some sort of variation so that you can have both, like different endings to the game or other systemic gameplay or open world mechanics, sandbox mechanics that allow the people to explore the game on their own terms and play the game in their own emergent ways. Budget. Maybe the budget is just too big. Maybe the publisher doesn't have the kind of money to pay for just this one game that you're pitching. Sometimes the budget is too small, like they're looking for a certain size of game that they really want to release as part of their portfolio, and it might not be ambitious enough, and that could mean, by extension, that the budget is too small. Maybe worse if the budget is not proportional to the production expectations. So you will not be seen as a serious actor if you're pitching a game and you show a budget that doesn't have healthy salaries for all the developers, that doesn't take into consideration the technical needs of the game, the logistical needs of making and releasing the game. We need to have mutually reasonable expectations and a fair division between studio and publisher of financial responsibility. So the details of your budget are actually quite important. TV's canceling me.
You don't want that? You find it okay? So I don't screw this up.
And then we have the team. If you're pitching me a huge, cool game with a budget of 100 million, I say, awesome, that sounds really cool. Let's make that game. And then you show me the team slide, and it's like you and your two friends. and then I'm going to start losing some confidence. How's it going there?
Elias is here.
Elias will fix the beef. Thanks. Great. Or it might not just be the size of the team, it could be the composition of the team. You're showing me a heavily art-reliant game or a very technically advanced game, and you're showing me a team that is mostly artists or mostly programmers, but not in the distribution that I need to see to feel confident that you can actually deliver on that game. Or sometimes, unfortunately, it's just a lack of trust due to the limited experience of making and releasing games. If you have shown that you can release a game on your own, or even better, with a publisher, we know that you know some of the language. Some of the friction will be gone because we don't have to teach you as much. We don't mind teaching you. Most people don't. But if you're new to making games and publishers say, oh, we're happy to work with juniors, lawyer up. Always get a lawyer first. That's a different advice, but that is always true. Side note, Kind of Brave will pay for your lawyers if you pick a good one. And lastly, chemistry is super important, and it's something that we focus a lot on. We need to be able to communicate well. If we fear that there will be poor communication, or we even experience poor communication in the initial dialogues, we'll be worried about our collaboration, because we'll be communicating a lot, all the way up until release and beyond. If we have different goals or different expectations of what everyone is doing and what will happen with the game, we might not be able to work together. And I'd say super important for every party is that we share values. If we share values, then we can get along with a lot of things on a fundamental level. If we don't, then we're gonna run into trouble down the line. And that leads me into some of the things that we're looking at from Kind of Brave. We'll call it the contextual wish list. I'd say these are the things that I'm less confident that every publisher will be interested in, but it's mainly due to our business model, but also our 3 people, players, planet, pillars. So for us, every project that you're pitching is very important, but the first project that you're pitching, or the one you're coming to us with, will be the first of many. To us, as we have this acquisition model, we're equally interested in game number 2 or number 3, all the way up to like 5 or 10 or 15, depending on how many games you're hoping to release. We need to find the element of consistency. We want to find the red thread or the common theme that leads you through these games that tell a lot about what you want to create as artists, as creators. But we also need to see some kind of proof that you are building forward, that the next game you're making is more ambitious and more viable or more sellable than the previous one, because of the things that you learn and the things that you build and create through that process. So we want to see a timeline of projects that you want to make. Again, values, and for us, our key values are tied to sustainability. We want you to take a big responsibility for the things that you're creating. We believe in creative freedom, but you still need to take responsibility for social sustainability. We also work a lot with ecological sustainability, making environmentally conscious decisions, making strategic choices about travel, buying things secondhand, buying specific hardware, and always measuring everything. Every little thing that we do, every meal that we eat, every piece of merch that we print, we calculate everything according to standard protocols, so that we know what our impact is on the world and how we can mitigate, reduce, and eventually compensate for that. That's one aspect of it. And of course, economical sustainability, the implicit third pillar of sustainable governance, is also like you're willing and motivated by working with these aspects of sustainability while being conscious that we're on a capitalist market and we need to be commercially viable with every project that we make. The only reason we can keep this machine that is sustainable, that takes responsibility going, is by making sure we also feed it with enough money that we can keep going. We're not going to say yes to a nice little art project because we share values. That's not enough. We need to eat as well. You need to eat. You need salaries, and you need your bonuses, and you need to have fun, and you can't do that if you're starving. Starving is no fun. That's our motto. Diversity, super important, and something that we're always keeping in mind when we're building our teams, when we're helping our teams grow, and when we're talking to new projects. We need converging and collaborative perspectives. We need scalable and holistically resilient teams that can work for a long time. Building an inclusive studio culture the same way that we're trying to build an inclusive company group culture. Location is quite important because it affects the way that we can communicate and the way that we can meet face to face and strengthen ourselves as a team and have a sense of community among the group. Ethical business models also ties into the sustainability. We don't believe in games that are exploitative or addictive. The games should be resting on the merits of their own quality. We will never touch anything that has anything with gambling to do. We don't think that anything with crypto solutions adhere to the sustainability pillars. We don't think it's socially, ecologically, or economically sustainable the way that it's being handled. And so we will say no until we're proven otherwise. Transparent revenue models, and we're generally avoiding proprietary hardware. That means like VR or things that need special controllers, other than modular controllers for accessibility use, of course, because we're big proponents of accessibility. And yeah, we want you to make your game, yeah, that was the last point, sorry. We want your games to be available to as many people as possible because everyone deserves to be able to play games. We don't think that every game should be for everyone, but we think there should be something for everyone. So we have our 4 main accessibility tenets. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to run them, but there needs to be a minimum level of thought through accessibility implemented in every game that we make. But we will pay for it, we'll teach you, and we'll help you achieve that, so you can focus on just living up to the vision. Finally, I'll go through this checklist of potentially actionable things that you can consider when you're making your game, but also the things or the aspect of that which you can't really change and you're just going to have to live with. Typically, people talk to a lot of publishers. I've heard people having over 100 meetings with different companies before they find the publisher that fits them in both ways. And some will have 100 meetings and still not find a publisher. But what you can consider here is the timing. So first of all, you want to reach out early in your development. You want to have active dialogues. If the game is too early to show, too early to make a decision, at least you have a contact now. At least you have an actionable next step, and they can tell you what they need to make a decision. So they'll give you more time. You never want to reach out and ask for funding when you're in a desperate situation, when you're not ready to take anything but a bad deal, because then you're going to get a bad deal. If the timing doesn't fit the publisher, however, there's nothing you can do about it. You can make your budget flexible by having adjustable scopes. You can have different sizes of the game available. Like we could add or remove 2 or 3 levels to make the game smaller or bigger. You can't change the budget in a way that undermines your quality of life as developers, because you can't help the fact that you need to eat. Don't undervalue yourselves. If some publishers are niche, they work with a specific type of game, do some research, look up if your game fits them. Otherwise, save your time and save their time. You can't help that some publishers want to focus on a specific genre or a specific market. You can look at the technical solutions that are needed to reach all the platforms, like is my game at an early stage ready to be ported to Nintendo Switch, to other consoles, to mobile as well. But you can't affect that some publishers work specifically with some platforms. Localization, huge factor of your game. Remember that more than 60% of all players do not speak English and will not play your game in English. You're ostracizing more than half the world of gamers if you're only making your game in English. So remove language or add a technical support for translating the game. Service needs, so make it clear to the publisher what it is you need help with. If it's funding, mention that. If you want help with marketing, or if you want to do your own marketing, tell that. But we need an idea of the things that you need help with for releasing the game. You can't help that some publishers offer some services, but not others. But you will find that out by doing some research or talking to them. And finally, one of the biggest things that I like to see is some market analysis. Use the tools available online. Do your research. Look up every competitor, every game that is vaguely similar to yours, and learn your enemy. Spy a lot. Use the Steam Spy. Look at their Steam reviews. Like, you have a whole catalog on Steam for every game that is competing with you, every player telling you what they like and don't like about the game. That is your Bible. That is your the cheat sheet to how to succeed. They're telling you everything they like about the game that you need to reproduce and do at least as good. And they're telling you everything that they hate about it and everything that adds friction. That's all the things you need to avoid. And if you do all those things, then you succeed and you're better than those competitors. That's the way that you can achieve that. And finally, value your own integrity, take a clear stance with your values, really vocalize your expectations, and stand your ground if you can't agree on the fundamental spiritual level with the people that you are going to spend a lot of time with, that are going to hold your money dangling above you until you reach the next milestone. We don't do it that way, but other publishers might. Then, thanks. then you're not being respectful to yourself and your needs. Not everyone will respect you or your values or share them. Save yourself the trouble of fighting your way out of a contract by making your values clear from the beginning. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Brilliant.
So do we have a question in the audience?
Make it really good.
Please.
There's so much pressure. So when you're meeting with someone and they're pitching their game to you and you're chipping away at the marble, what are some questions that typically a lot of people struggle to answer well or at all? I would like the information beforehand to be able to answer you.
Okay.
Very good question.
Right.
Yeah, so the question was, what are a typical question that studios that are pitching to us are struggling to answer in the early stage meetings? I think that people are typically presenting things that they think we want to hear as publishers, and that'll be a lot of focus on the game and the mechanics and the intricacies of that. Super important. I think most pitch decks are actually too short these days, especially the ones that are written down. I want to hear more about the teams. People underestimate the need for information about the team and the people, like really the skills and the interests and the personalities of them, because that's such a huge thing. Every investor will tell you they're not investing in a company, they're not investing in a game, they're investing in the people that are running that company. So there could always be more information about the team and generally more information about the long-term plans, especially when you're talking to investors and acquisition publishers as ourselves. So it's not just here and now, it's where do you want to be 5 or 10 years from now, and how can we help you, and why would we want to help you? The question most people struggle to answer, I think it's somewhere along those lines, like what do you actually want to achieve? What are your goals with the studio? And people will just kind of blank out and they say, I just want to get a basic salary. I just want to work making games. I think that resonates with a lot of people, but that's not enough because it's not visionary. That's just how to enable you to keep working with what you're passionate about. How are you going to make a dent in the world is what I actually want to hear.
We are ending